Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I wanted to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy Yuletide. And in keeping with the original traditions of Christmas, I am putting the Yule back in Yuletide, and I would be out pillaging the local British shops in my Viking helmet, but it turned out they're all closed today. So thanks once again, Brits, for shutting down one of the oldest Viking traditions of raiding your shops and villages at Christmas. But today I want to talk to you guys about something that I wanted to do a video on days ago but got tied up with other stuff. And that is an article written on Bodybuilding.com by Jim Stoppani, who has a PhD in exercise science. And notice I didn't call him doctor because having a PhD doesn't make you a doctor in England, the country I live in at the moment. It's considered very poor form for someone who's not a medical doctor to use the term. So what I wanted to talk about is this piece, and I'm going to link the article down below for you guys, that he wrote in defense of vitamins. Now it's interesting that he only chose to address one writer's take on this when there have been over a dozen. And how would I describe this article? I'm not going to take this article apart because, quite frankly, it is a propaganda piece. And it's well enough written that I'm sure a lot of people are going to be convinced. And in fact, if I didn't know enough about the scientific method and enough about propaganda, I very well might have changed my own stance just from reading this article, or at least rethought it. But I see it for what it is. It is purely a propaganda piece. Now, I think it's interesting that, first of all, he discusses cherry-picking studies, and he only mentions 3 studies mentioned by one of the writers, and not the 30 or so that have been referenced, with his own very limited set of cherry-picked studies. So it's interesting that in propaganda, you always try to accuse the enemy of doing what you actually do sometimes so that you can direct and deflect away from yourself. And this article is exactly that. It's basically conspiracy theory against conspiracy theory. And in this case, he's talking about cherry-picking studies. But the problem you run into is that why you see more and more researchers coming to the consensus of multivitamin supplements not being useful is because the bulk of the studies are showing that. You're always going to have some studies that conflict, but the problem you run into is that if they go to meta-analysis, the researchers and reviewers have to look at those and figure out which one is right and wrong. And they actually need to try to explain why you have that discrepancy. And that's the way science is supposed to work, and its checks and balances. There's always going to be different factors that influence researchers' conclusions, their personal bias towards it, whether it's conscious or unconscious. There's going to be bias in data, in research, and in conclusions. Not always the data, but the way studies are done, how those conclusions are applied. There's going to be personal bias, and that bias can be varied as far as the motivations. Now, it's interesting that Mr. Stoppani mentioned the financial bias, and I think that's really funny because, yes, there is financial bias involved with anything doctors do as far as big pharmaceutical companies go. I don't think anyone disputes that. However, when he's coming from an industry that survives off of supplement sales, Bodybuilding.com is a website that draws all of its profits from supplement sales, and it makes millions a year. He's writing for it as someone who is a well-known supplement pusher, supplement backer. So to try to say that scientists are biased towards no vitamins so that they can cause widespread health problems so that they can make more money off of drugs in another 20 years, it's a bit of a conspiracy theory, and it's interesting that it's coming from people who survive and make their living and their profits off of supplement sales. So when you have to look at it from that perspective, that even made Grumpy Cat fall over when the realization of that hit her. But from that perspective, you have to ask, well, wait a minute, is it more likely that these doctors want to cause millions of people to get sick from deficiencies over the next 20 years so that they can make more profits down the road in drugs? Or is it more likely that people who right now, here and today, feel threatened about their income from supplement sales, if the whole vitamin industry falls under because people realize multivitamins are a waste, they're going to lose millions and millions of dollars. So are they going to step back and defend something that they are making their money on and try to put out propaganda to say that someone else is interested in longer term money and willing to sacrifice millions and millions of people to make money in 20 years? Versus their immediate loss of profits they're scared of next month? Where's the real conspiracy here? Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go, because we all know that's the only reason you guys watched this video.